David Tasca is with us. He is a freelance producer slash director of live sports, college and professional. He is in Buffalo, New York right now. I'm in Los Angeles. It's amazing what Zoom can do. It connects us here. And we're going to talk about what makes David inspirational in the world of sports media. Look at his career, 30 years and counting. Have some fun talking stories about it. I'm Bryan Fenley, a national anchor at Fox Sports Radio. I'm actually doing this from one of the offices at FSR. David, it's an honor to have you along with us here. And I was listening to an interview you did, I think it was in 2019, and you talked about how when you're covering an event, you want to make sure that you have a wide shot of everything that's happening so that you don't miss anything. And I feel like this is what we're going to do in this conversation. We're going to wide shot of what you have done. But in that conversation you had in that interview, you talked about how there was this story about a cookie was thrown on the court and it went in 1,000 different pieces from a college basketball game, and you were able to pick that up. If there's a piece of your career that we couldn't see from the lens of what you've done and what you've been able to accomplish behind the scenes, what would you say is the biggest reason to how you've been able to pull off this 30-year run?
Well, a lot of it has to do with connections. So sometimes it's being in the right place at the right time. Fortunate enough for me, I started just at a local cable station, but that local cable station was owned by an owner that really wanted to do a regional sports network. So I was in the right place at the right time, and that local cable station grew into a regional sports network. Now, of course, I had to excel producing and directing to get that producer's position at the regional sports network. But, if that owner hadn't decided to form a regional sports network, that was really the first cookie that got me going, because the regional sports network turned into ESPN because I did work for ESPN when I was at the regional sports network. So it's funny how you can start small but get big just based on one person's decision, and that one person's decision to form a regional sports network really was the kickstart to my career.
That person saw something in you, and now you are living out your dream here, working for so many different entities and a schedule that is so busy. I don't even know how I have time for this conversation with you. I'm grateful for the opportunity. And like you said, and one of the things we mentioned in the intro is that in a lot of these broadcasts, you play the role of director, which essentially you're acting in real time here and you're going as the game is going. What about in essence, you are a director, but also we are the directors of our lives. We try to think that we know where we're going and what we're doing. But even you, that person being in the chair of being a director of your life per se, would you have not expected to happen in your career? Something that you did not foresee happening that ultimately ended up being a really meaningful part of your career journey.
Oh, definitely. I was more than happy to stay at a regional sports network. I was not anticipating, having a 17-year run with ESPN. So that was definitely the bonus to the bonus. So, again, in taking that run and doing work for ESPN and showing them that not only could I do the work, but more than trustworthy and more than available to do the work. Um, one door closes, another door opens. So when the regional sports network folded in 2005, because I had already done work with ESPN, I called ESPN and had my contacts there. And they said, sure, we'll bring you on a trial basis. Well, trial basis 17 years later, it was more than a trial basis. So opening doors and keeping them open is a good thing. And I've worked for people for over 30 years. I tend not to close any door. So you never know what will come up. You never know when it will come up. But that keeps life interesting. You know, it just keeps everything interesting because, as long as you stay open and more than just work and opportunities in your life, you know, you find that things are presented to you that are unexpected And most of the time when that happens, they're usually a good thing.
David Tasca is with us. I'm Bryan Fenley. Where were you? One of the most random spots you might have been when you received that unexpected, as you said, call from, say, an employer saying, "Hey, David, what are you doing next week? When are you available?" Like, where's the most random place you've taken a call where that unexpected happened for you?
Wow, that is a very good question. It's funny because you do so many games, and to tell you the truth, a lot of the times when you get another opportunity, you're actually in a truck working for, sometimes it's a different entity. Uh, Most of the time, it would be before a game. You're not doing anything. You're not taking a call during the game, of course. But I cannot tell you the amount of times that I've worked with people where that's happened. It hasn't
Ah,
happened to me as much as maybe the producer or the director that I'm sitting next to. Not to say it hasn't happened to me. Of course it has, but it seems like even technical directors, they're the people that push the buttons that actually, push the button that you see on air as far as your cameras go and as far as your graphics go. Lots of times before the game, they'll get phone calls and it's like, yeah, I'm available. I can do this. I can do that. And it's funny because it's happened to all of us in the business, but really, I would say a lot of times for most of the people in the business, especially us that do live sports, it's probably when you're in the truck. It's not during the game, but it's either before or immediately after the game.
and people who don't work in the business wouldn't realize like how many hours you are in the truck too.
Right.
So just by the law of probability of how many hours in a day you are in a truck in relation to when you're actually sleeping, the law of averages would have it that you certainly would get more of those calls while you're certainly in the truck. After a broadcast, you're done. You finished up what you've done. Like an athlete, David, who goes back and looks at film and tries to get better, how often will you go back to a broadcast you do and watch for what you did and how you did it and how you might want to change things?
Yeah, you know what? It all depends on your schedule. I mean, every producer and director would love to immediately go back and take a look, but it all depends on what games you have going on next, what your work schedule is. Um, and it's funny because most of the time you'd want to go back when you thought things went wrong. But it doesn't matter if things go wrong or if things go right, because there's an old axiom in our field, and it's so true. You're never as good as you think you are, but you're never as bad as you think you are either. When you think you had a really bad show, you go back and look at it and you're like, that wasn't as bad as what I thought. But then when you think you had a really great show, you go back and it's like, yeah, there's probably three or four things I could have done differently. So you're never as good as you think you are. You're never as bad as you think you are. Um, to tell you the truth, I probably in my career should have looked at more footage than what I had. But again, it's all as far as time goes, especially not so much now with COVID, but even just going back just 3 years ago and for the 10 years prior to that, you're traveling a lot. So after a game, you want to decompress a little bit. And it's funny because when you're in the truck doing the game, it's almost like you're an athlete in this aspect that you have to come down. It's not like after a game, you just go to your hotel room and go right to sleep. No, that doesn't happen. You need time to decompress, just like the players that play the game do. So you need to do that. And then usually, if you've got another game, you're on a 6 a.m. flight the next morning to go to the next city to do the next game. So it doesn't leave a whole lot of time sometimes to look at what you've done. And in my career, I wish I could have done that more than what I did. So for everybody aspiring out there, if you can look at your stuff, do that because it will really help you.
Sometimes I feel like when I look at your stuff, there's nothing to critique. And, you might say to yourself, well, you're just being nice, but it's true. And David Tasca is with us. I'm Bryan Fenley. I liked how you brought up the athlete metaphor for you in the truck. And I want to expound upon that and point out another metaphor in the sense of, let's say you're working a game and you're in the truck and you're watching these athletes. And when over the course of your career, David, have you most empathized with an athlete on the field of play? There was a connection there that you felt from a certain athlete in a game when you were in the truck?
Hmm. Yeah, that's a great question. Uh, Ironically, I would probably go back to the cookie game. I'll,
Ah,
I'll say this so I can tell you the little quick story behind the cookie, but also behind the athlete. Okay. So going into that game, J.R. Bremer, who actually made it to the NBA, at this time the game was Temple at St. Bonaventure. St. Bonaventure at that time wasn't the A10 power that they are now. They were just up and coming. Okay. And they had a head coach who had won an NIT title when he was a player in 1977. Now he was the head coach. Now we're in the mid 90s, and they're facing Temple. They're facing the great John Chaney, one of the best coaches ever. And they're facing the heart of their team, Mark Macon. I mean, it's an awesome Temple team. They're like number 3 in the country coming in, and Bonaventure's on the verge of the top 25. Bremer, the game before, did not have a good game. They lost a game they shouldn't have lost. And it was big because coming into this one, it was supposed to be 2 undefeated A10 teams facing each other, and it wasn't. So Bremer was really mad of the way he played before. So you get late in the game, and Temple's pretty much controlled the tempo. They've controlled the game, but they've never put Bonaventure away. So it's like an 8-point game. Okay. Now, back then, and they have changed the rules since this happened, the fans were right on top of the visitors' bench,
mm.
really giving Chaney all he could, yelling, screaming. And Chaney, for the most part, was good about it. So there's 3 minutes left in the game. Temple's got an 8-point lead. They're cruising. And somebody throws a cookie on the court, and it hits Chaney. Okay. And he is livid. He's furious. And nobody sees it except for Chaney. So Chaney takes the cookie and he slams it down on the court. Now the cookie is all over the place. They have to stop play. And the referees one of the referees saw him throw the cookie and he tees him up. So now that 8-point lead, Chaney's going ballistic. He's like, this wasn't me. I didn't throw the cookie. And the official saying, like, you slammed it down. I saw you do it. Yeah, but I got hit with it. Why aren't you giving them a technical? So the St. Bonaventure fans did not get a technical. Chaney gets a technical. The 8-point lead goes down to 6. Bremer on the next possession, because on a technical, you get to keep possession, hits a 3. Now it's a 3-point game. Okay. Chaney's beyond himself, just
Yeah.
on himself. And because he's not coaching the way he should be coaching, because he's still livid at the fans. And the fans know this, so they're even getting him on a worse. Okay. So come down to the end of the game, Bonaventure gets the ball down by 2, 10 seconds left. And who hits the game-winning jumper? J.R. Bremer. Hits it with no time remaining, and the place goes nuts. Everybody's storming the court. Well, after the game, John Chaney just lights right up into the St. Bonaventure fans, like, and tells everybody in the A10 what happened. And the next year, they literally bring the stands like 6 rows back from where they were. But J.R. Bremer, who was the GOAT the game before, hits the game-winning shot, and that propelled St. Bonaventure not only to be a top 25 team, but that year they ended up almost beating Kentucky and to go to the Sweet 16. So they had a great year. And it was really spurred on by that victory, and it was really spurred on by one kid who was the GOAT before. And after he made that shot, he helped to put the team on his back. And here's the other funny thing about J.R. Bremer. He's like 5'11".
Oh,
He
gosh.
was just a small point guard. Okay. Everybody he ever played against was taller than he was, but he had the heart of a lion. And that's all that mattered.
So since they moved the stands back, that's where you come in, because you in a sense, from what you guys do in the broadcast setup, you're bringing the fans closer with what you're doing.
Right.
And having the broadcaster frame of mind is that you have the viewers' best interests at heart and how you're
Absolutely.
trying to convey. What do you, knowing that, David, what do you think that some producers lose sight of when, like you talked about, and something that you've been a staunch advocate of, and that is being the advocate for the viewer? And like, what do some producers not get about that when thinking about that mindset over the course of a broadcast?
You know what? That almost goes back to the very first thing you said, Brian.
Okay.
So one of the first things that you said was about thinking wide,
Yeah,
thinking big, okay? And not losing the perspective of everything that's going on, okay? Sometimes you want to replay too much. Sometimes you try and get in maybe a little bit too much, and you don't realize that the moment you're in is bigger than what you're about to do.
sure.
Okay. So when you get into those late game situations, as a director, you have to make sure that if you're going to cut away from your game camera, one, there's a really good reason for it, but two, you're not going to miss anything while you do it. And the same thing goes from a producer angle. If you're in a 30-second timeout, you've got to make sure that whatever you're going to do for that 30 seconds not only pays off what just happened, but you're getting back to playing time to show where everyone is on the court for basketball, or to show the way the defense is set up for football. Same thing with shifts in baseball. I mean, every sport has their different nuance. But the idea in thinking big is to be able to show the viewer not only what the offense is doing, but what the defense might do to counteract that. And making sure that you give the viewer that ability to see it. Because if you talk about it, but you don't see it, it doesn't help the viewer. So thinking big really, really helps when it comes to both producing and directing, especially when you're coming down to the end of the game.
And no matter what game of whatever sport, there is going to be in this business dealing with those tense moments, from just getting stuff on the air and having to have the savviness to have the right conduct and being able to deal with tremendous pressure. This is a business, as we all know, that's cutthroat and it can shake you. Despite all that, David, how do you take it easier on yourself? Because this business can be so hard on somebody, but clearly you have incredible an amount of lifespan to it. So how do you take care of yourself despite a business that, like you said, you never know when you get that next phone call? It's always kind of keeping you on the edge.
Well, the last thing after every camera meeting that I've ever done, the last thing that I will say to my camera people I'm directing is have fun. This is fun. What you and I are doing is fun. Sports is fun. And if you're not having fun as a crew, if you're not having fun, the viewers at home, it will get through to them. They will get that vibe that there's something else going on, that that they'll get that vibe. Believe it or not, they will. So having fun is very, very important. And also realizing that nobody's perfect. In our field, mistakes are always going to happen. And it doesn't matter if you're doing the Super Bowl or if you're doing just a regular college basketball game in November between a Division III team and a Division I team that's going to win by 50. Okay? Mistakes are going to happen. So when they do happen, how do you react to that? Okay? Are you going to go nuts because a mistake happened? I hope not, because you don't want to affect the rest of your show. Everything that you do and the way that you react affects the rest of your show. And the biggest thing, is what you just said. In those pressure moments, people don't remember the start of a game. They remember the end of the game. So when you get those buzzer beaters, when you get those touchdowns with 5 seconds left, when you get the walk-off home run, nobody ever remembers that you maybe misidentified a person, in the first inning or the first quarter. Nobody's going to remember if a swish pan happens in the second quarter. They're going to remember how the game ended and how you covered it. And if you nail that, well, then all is forgiven leading up to it.
That is so well pointedly said. In essence, and as much as we love Coach Cheney, acting like he did in a broadcast setup where you throw the cookie might not be conducive to handling a late game scenario from a broadcast perspective that well. And I'm sure that you would know that from all of your experiences.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And believe me, I've worked with people, and we all have in the field that, kind of lost it. And when you lose it, what happens is you're not concentrating on your task at hand. Okay. And, it feels like I'm picking on Coach Cheney, but that was an example. He wasn't coaching, he was so upset. You can blame him for being upset. He wasn't wrong for being upset. But at the same time, you're not doing your job. And your job at that moment is more important than any reaction you could have to anything before that. And that's one thing with experience you have to realize. Okay. And you can always deal with the mistake, after the game. You can always go back and talk to the person that messed up and find out what their reasoning was. You can always go back on that. But to try and, get that upset during the time, it upsets the whole broadcast.
Well, needless to say, David Tasca has the perfect temperament for this job. His resume speaks for itself. How busy his schedule is should give you a clue into how good of a job he is, as he's working for seven different entities and counting, traveling all over the place, working in college and professional sports as a freelance producer and director. David Tasca, I'm Bryan Fenley. David, thanks so much for doing this. This was a lot of fun getting inside of your mind and how you do things and a little bit more on your background.
Thank you very much. Really appreciate it. Have a great day.